السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام، تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام، آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى، أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وجنبنا الفواحش والمعاصي والخطايا والزلل. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear respected brothers, elders, fellow community members. Before I start, if I can just ask everybody who's going to be taking part to move forward. Right, let's close in all of these gaps. And there's a reason. Let me just point out this reason first before you think I'm nitpicking or I'm just doing your head in. When the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, he was approached by a strange man who later turned out to be Jibreel alayhi. And Jibreel had come to learn something from the Prophet. Now that whole interaction is a very important template for us on how we should carry ourselves and what our demeanor and conduct should be like in any educational setting. It doesn't have to be in a classroom. This is also an educational setting. So Jibreel alayhi salam came and he sat just like most people will be sat here today in the tashahhud position. And he sat with his knees touching the Prophet's knees. And that was calculated. It wasn't just haphazard. It wasn't just random. Jibreel was trying to show us through that interaction that you need to close the space physically for there to be less of an intellectual distance between you and your teacher. So the further away you are from your teacher physically, then that equates to intellectual and psychological distance. Right? And if you're not on the same wavelength as your teacher, you can't take benefit from him or her or whoever it might be. So that's why we try to close in the gaps. And the companions provided the best example for that. Whenever they were sat in any gathering with the Prophet ﷺ, then you could literally throw a cloth or a tarp over their heads and you wouldn't be able to find the dips. Right? That's how close they were sat together. And if a bird were to come and perch itself on the head of any companion, then it would just be in heaven. It could just sit there for hours on end because the companion was so engrossed and captivated by what the Prophet was saying, right? So we ask Allah that He makes the audience like the companions and the speaker like the Prophet. So we started something yesterday. We didn't manage to finish it off, but it's all right. We can carry on into today's session. Let me ask this question again, because I only got one response yesterday. For the next 5 days, what we're going to be discussing. The post has been out there for a couple of weeks now, so I'm sure people will have familiarized themselves with the topic. Productivity principles. And we said yesterday, I'm not just going to throw theoretical principles at you, because then you'll feel disconnected. You'll be thinking to yourself, how can I relate to just some rules written down on a piece of paper? So we said we're going to supplement these theoretical principles with a practical example of somebody from the past. Not a prophet, not a companion, but just an everyday, regular human being like me and you. And who is this curious example? Somebody just shouted out. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And he's known as Umar al-Thani, the second Umar. For you to be compared to the legendary Umar radiallahu anhu isn't just anything to be taken as trivial, right? If somebody compares you to a leader who commanded respect, if somebody compares you to a person who scares even the devil himself, then there must be something special about you. So we said, let's just give the audience a brief profile as to who this man was and how his trajectory to fame really panned out and played out. And from yesterday's session, we realized, you know what? He had a very normal upbringing. There was nothing very special about him. And even during his days as an Umayyad governor in Medina, and then his reach was extended to include the entirety of the western coast of Arabia, he was just a normal governor. He was just a normal prince. I mean, he had a bit of swagger about him. He had a refined taste, and he was a role model for all of these fashionable youth in Medina. But apart from that, he didn't have any glowing standout attributes. But when he became the caliph, and that was a bizarre twist of events, right? The odds were stacked against him becoming the caliph, right? The odds, you could say, were 6,000 to 1. I'm going to put it like that, right? There was a very slim chance that he would ever become the caliph, because neither was his father a caliph, Abdul Aziz, neither were any of his brothers caliphs, and none of his immediate relatives held that mantle. But he commanded the respect of the two previous caliphs, right? His first cousin Al-Walid, he saw potential in Umar, so he made him the governor. And then he even promoted him. And he even saved him from another Umayyad governor in Iraq who had his crosshair set on Umar, because Umar was becoming too popular. Umar was snatching all of these other governors, Iraqi citizens, because Umar was compassionate, Umar was fair, and Umar was just. This other Iraqi governor was a disciplinarian, right? He liked to command discipline, if you want to put it nicely. But his loyalty to the Umayyad state drove him down a bit of a dark path, right? So he became known as a bloodshedder. He became known as a mass murderer. And today, quite bizarrely, ironically, in the Arab world, if you ever want to compare an Arab dictator or despot with anybody, then you'll use his name. Right? Does anybody remember who he was? Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Right? Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Just on a bit of a detour here. What's curious about Hajjaj ibn Yusuf is he was an awful man, but he did amazing things though. Right? And his love, you'll be surprised when you hear about this. This man killed companions, by the way. This man launched an attack against the holy sanctuary in Mecca. Right? He destroyed the Kaaba. The Kaaba today is a square shape, right? But during the time just before Hajjaj's, before his rise to fame, the Kaaba was actually a rectangle. Its structure was rectangular. So during the Prophet's time, it was a square. And then when the time of another companion called Ibn Zubayr, right? So Ibn Zubayr was the nephew of Aisha radiallahu anha and the son of Abu Bakr's oldest daughter, Asma radiallahu anha. So he was in charge. He took control over Mecca and Medina, a large piece of territory in the Muslim world. And he actually reconstructed the Kaaba. Right? He renovated it to bring it back to its original design and its original schematics during the time of Ibrahim. Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't build a square structure, his structure was rectangular. So Ibn Zubayr then renovated it back to a rectangular structure. And along came Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, and he wanted to curry favors with the Umayyad Caliph. So he launched an attack. 6 months. Imagine, for 6 months he besieged Mecca. He didn't let anything go in and nothing can go out. So he destroyed the Kaaba and then he rebuilt it as a square. So this is Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. But you'll be surprised at this fact, and it astonished me as well. He loved the Quran more than probably any of us would. He had a stronger connection and attachment with the Quran, which was stronger than maybe even that of a scholar. Why? Because his father was actually a teacher of the Quran. His father was a mentor for the Quran. And because he spent so long with his father, and because parenting is so important, because you as a parent can leave a lasting impression on your child, right? And that's in whatever you do. So he later on became a tyrant and a despot and somebody who became emblematic of oppression. But because his father instilled and really drilled home the importance of the Quran, he built a long-standing affinity with the Quran. And I'll give you one example. If you pick up a Quran that we have today, the copies of the Quran, then Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Underneath the ba, you'll have 1 dot. Underneath, on top of a ta, you'll have 2 dots. On top of a tha, you'll have 3 dots. In the middle of a jim, you'll have 1 dot. On top of a kha, you'll have 1 dot. But it's surprising to note that during the era of the Prophet, and then Abu Bakr and Umar, Uthman, Ali, all the way up until Hajjaj's era, these dots, known as diacritical marks, were non-existent. They weren't there. So now imagine me or you, as a non-Arab, trying to read Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we'll be stuck at Rabb. Is it a ta, or is it a tha, is it a ba? Right, so it was practically impossible for a non-Arab to read the Quran. And that status quo persisted for quite a while until Hajjaj came along. And Hajjaj wanted the entire world to be able to read the Quran. Hajjaj wanted everybody to build their own and forge their own personal connection with the Quran, despite all of his side hustles of oppression and tyranny. So he's the one who led a huge, massive project and campaign to add all of these diacritical marks to the Quran. So no matter what he did, every single time you read the Quran, the reward will go straight back to him. That's why history is not black and white. If you want to approach history trying to find the evil villains and the legendary heroes, then you're fooling yourself. Right? You have a childish outlook, because you'll find evil people who did amazing things, amazing people who did some evil things, and then you'll find people in between, across the entire spectrum. But it's not our job to be the judge, jury, and the executioner. Your job is to take a lesson from their misfortunes and take a lesson from their fortunes. That's what we're trying to do today and throughout these next few sessions with Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And what I want to focus on here over the next 4 sessions is we're going to keep his spirituality to a side. We're not going to talk about how pious he was or how scrupulous he was or how he tried to distance himself from the world. He was a worldly man. He was a caliph. I mean, you can't be a caliph, a head of state, without involving yourself in the affairs of the world. But he laid down a very, very replicable template for all of us, which is you can be a doctor, you can be a student, you can excel at whatever you do in the world, at your employment, but at the same time, you can still reach dizzying heights of spirituality. It's all about your outlook. Right? And there's a very, very important quote that I came across in a book written by a non-Muslim who was a Christian from the West, and he was an American, and his book was on 7 productivity principles. Right? And he said, if you want to sum up everything that I've written in this one book, his book's a bestseller, by the way. He said just one line, one slogan, which is you as a human being are a product of your own decisions, not of your circumstances. Because people like to blame things around them. Oh, it's because of the upbringing of my parents that I'm the way I am. Or it's because I wasn't given the opportunities that I deserved when I was young. Or it's because my teachers didn't focus on me when I was at school. Or I didn't have enough time when I was young. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough this or that. Constantly complaining, trying to shift the blame onto somebody else. But like the quote says, you are a product of your own decisions. Like fate is literally in your hands. That Allah's given you free will. You can't complain about anybody else you can't try and shift the blame onto anybody else. So what we plan to do today is for the next 10 minutes, finish off on Umar's role as a caliph, and then just segue into the first couple of points. So when he became the caliph, it was a complete shock, right? Because it was just ad hoc, randomly, on Suleiman's deathbed, the previous caliph. He was given some piece of advice, and eventually he thought, you know what? He had a guilty conscience. He'd done some terrible things when he was a caliph. He wanted to make amends. So he thought, you know what? Let me at least do something right just before I die. So he passed the baton of caliphate on to Umar, who wasn't his brother, wasn't his son, wasn't even related to him as a close relative. He was his cousin and he was his brother-in-law. So when he was given this leadership, he didn't hanker after it. Umar didn't run for it. Leadership came and chose him, and he then accepted the role. And now that leadership had chosen him, Allah was on his side. The Prophet said in a hadith, don't run after the world. More specifically, don't run after posts and positions and posts of employment. Right? I mean, you can make your application, you can go for an interview, but don't feel like you're entitled to it. Don't feel like you deserve it. Because if you show you're disconnected, then Allah will step in and Allah will help you. And if Allah helps you with something, then there's nobody who can really ruin that connection and help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when he became the caliph, then he was dubbed as the pious caliph. Because the people before him, they just indulged in the world. I mean, they had little care and consideration for their subjects and for their citizens, but Umar caused a revolution. When he came into office, he changed and touched the lives of every single one of his subjects. Muslim, non-Muslim, poor, affluent, the ones who are privileged and the destitute as well. He radically downsized his previously lavish lifestyle, and he made it very simple, and it was devoid of worldly luxuries. And he actually used to fear using even one gold coin and one silver coin. Why? Because that's the property of the public. It's not my personal estate. This belongs to the Muslims. And he was somebody who was self-accountable. Right? He knew that on the Day of Judgment, Allah is going to ask me about every single penny that I spent and every single penny that I earned. Where did it come from and how did you spend it? And this is why he's known as Umar II, because he's reminiscent of Umar radiallahu anhu. You know, Umar radiallahu anhu, the original one, he always used to say, and he used to say this with tears swelling in his eyes. He was genuinely scared. He was genuinely scared of this prospect. He said, I'm scared that on the Day of Judgment, Allah's going to call me forward and he's going to bring in a camel. He's going to bring a camel as the plaintiff and I'm going to be the defendant. And that camel is going to complain that, oh Allah, I was a camel in Iraq on the banks of the Euphrates River, right? And I died of starvation, of hunger. And this was during the reign of this very man, Umar radiallahu anhu. And Umar used to say, I'm responsible for not just the human beings, but also for every single creature and every single animal. And I'm scared that Allah is going to punish me because of this one camel that died out of dehydration on the banks of the Euphrates. The reason why he said Euphrates was because the Euphrates River is in Iraq and Umar was based in Medina. Now, how are you as one man going to keep a track of every single camel and every single creature so far away as a land in Iraq? Right? But that's what his self-accountability was like. That's the level it was to. Now just think about ourselves, right? We eat anything and everything. We don't care where our money comes from. We don't care how we spend our money, even every single second. Right? We're looking at productivity principles. Why? Because the currency of this world, which is time, is very limited. It's not unlimited. We want to maximize and optimize every single second. Now Allah is going to ask you, I gave you a life. Right? I gave you so many seconds and so many minutes and so many hours. How did you spend it? That's why you have to constantly make this supplication. Allahumma hasibni hisaban yasira. Oh Allah, I'm going to paraphrase here. Take it easy on me in the hereafter. When you're taking my account of deeds, just go easy on me. Because if Allah really wanted to, He could open up your book and metaphorically, He could put on His reading glasses and He could say, right, I'm going to go through every single second of your life. Right? For 5 seconds, you spent 5 seconds without worshipping me, without saying subhanallah, without praying your salah. Why was that? Was it something more important? Was it something which commanded your attention more than worshipping me? Right? Every single penny that you spent, right? When you're at your job and your home time is 5 p.m. and you went home at 4:55, right? You went home 5 minutes early. The amount of money that you earned during those 5 minutes, you have to be scared. Allah's going to ask you about it. Right? Your employer was paying you thinking that you're still at work, but there you are taking an early leave or early break. You come 5 minutes late from your lunch break, you're being paid by your employer. Right? Is that lawful money? You have to ask yourself that. And then with that money, you're then going to go and buy food to feed your children and to feed your family and to take your family on holidays. Right? Are you not nourishing your family with unlawful means and unlawful income? That's what you call accountability, right? So Umar wanted to survive on the bare minimum. And people used to think to themselves, wow, we have only ever witnessed this amount of scrupulousness during the time of the Prophet and during the time of Abu Bakr and during the time of Umar. And because of this, because he shunned the world, his family, the Umayyad family, hated him. He earned the animosity and the hatred of his own family. Because as soon as he came into office, he went to all of his family members. They didn't throw a party. You know, if we get a new job or a baby shower, gender reveal, right? We want our family to be part and parcel of the happy moment, joyous moment. And he's become a caliph, right? So you'd expect people to throw a party for him. He said, no. He redefined leadership, right? He didn't throw a party because he thought to himself, he acknowledged, as per the Quran and as per the Sunnah, leadership isn't a God-given privilege. It's not something to be happy about. This is a burden which has been placed on my shoulders. Before, when I was just a normal governor, Allah's going to ask me about the people in my province. But now that I'm a caliph, Allah's going to ask me about every single human being, Muslim, non-Muslim, who is under my control. That's why the Prophet said, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Every single one of you is a shepherd. And Allah will ask you about your flock. This doesn't just pertain or apply to political leadership. But more than you realize, every single one of you here is a leader in your own capacity. If you're a father, you're a leader of the household. If you're a mother, you're a leader of your children. If you're a teacher, you're a leader of your classroom. If you're an imam, you're a leader of your congregation. If you're driving a car, you're a leader of your passengers. Because if anything happens to them, because of your negligence, Allah's going to ask you about it. So it's all about accountability, right? So he went to his family members, no party, no banquet, and he stripped them of all of their wealth. He said, you own this land. Well, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the state. So he stripped them and divested them of all of their personal properties and their estates and their wealth, and he put it back into the public treasury. Now you tell me, which family member is not going to be annoyed? Which family member is not going to be absolutely infuriated? Right? And just a bit of foreshadowing, his death is a result of the animosity created between him and his family members. Right? Spoiler alert, they ended up poisoning him. His own family, because of how scrupulous he was in every single penny that was brought into the state, his family couldn't take it because the rich lifestyle they lived before was now a long distant memory, right? And they were missing the good old days. So they actually commissioned a slave of the royal household to poison Umar's meal, and he passed away like that, right? So he didn't care about personal relationships. He didn't care about what his family thought, what his friends thought, what his citizens thought. The only connection and relationship which mattered to him was between him and his Lord, him and his Creator. Because he realized, right? He read the Quran. He was a man of the Quran. He was a scholar himself. I always like to imagine he came across this verse a million times in the Quran. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ شَأْنٌ يُغْنِيهِ. He must have thought about the Day of Judgment and those terrifying, horrifying scenes, right? Where everybody will be stark naked. You'll be returned back to your natural, primordial form. Where everybody will be uncircumcised. It may seem like bizarre details, but the Prophet told us this because he wanted us to know that you will be nothing on the Day of Judgment. You will lose all of your respect, all of your honor, all of your dignity. You will have nothing except for your good deeds. You won't even have clothes. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she was quite scared of that. She thought, I'm a woman of modesty and chastity. I don't want other people to see my private parts. The Prophet said, don't worry about it. Because people won't even realize you're there. People won't even acknowledge anybody else's existence because they'll be so scared about what Allah's going to say to them. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ. Your mum won't even want to know who you are. Your father won't even want to know you. They'll run away from you. They'll be scared that you might ask them for one good deed. They'll be scared that you might come up to them and say, please, you're my dad, you're my mom, you're my best friend. Please, I just want one good deed. And your friends will say, you know what? I can't afford to part with just one good deed. I don't know if this one good deed will tip the balance in my favor or against my favor. I don't know if that one good deed might take me to paradise or might damn me to eternal doom in the hellfire, right? So I don't want to know you, right? And friends on that day, right? Your very friends who might take you away from the mosque, your very friends who might peer pressure you into, I don't know, substance abuse or drugs or smoking, or the plague nowadays is vaping, right? Your friend who, when you say, oh, come on, it's Salah time, let's go to the mosque, let's say it's fine, let's just finish off the match, let's just finish off watching it, we'll pray by ourselves at half time. Those friends will become your enemies on that day. Your friends won't even remember your name. They won't remember all those moments you used to mess around together and all those moments you used to cause trouble, right? They won't care about that. يَوْمَئِذٍ شَأْنٌ يُغْنِي. Every single person will be preoccupied with one thing. They'll only have one tension looming over their heads, which is, what on earth is Allah going to do to me? And I always like to think, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz thought about this when he stripped his family members of all of their prestige and privilege. He couldn't care less about what they thought. What really mattered was what Allah thought. Right? That's the true relationship. So he came in and he caused all of these reforms. Right? There used to be a special tax which only the non-Muslims have to pay. And as soon as you become a Muslim, you don't have to pay anymore. But the previous Umayyad caliphs, their love for greed, their love for wealth and their greed got the better of them. So it was quite outrageous, because even when people converted to Islam, they still had to pay that special protection tax. And they thought, we've become a Muslim and you're still oppressing us like this? For them, it was all about how much money can we then stream in to the state treasury. But Umar came along. You know what he said? He said the Prophet wasn't sent as a tax collector. The Prophet was sent as a mercy to mankind. The Prophet was sent as a source of divine guidance, right? So I don't care if the state's treasuries are bled dry. I don't care if we become bankrupt. As long as we have people entering the fold of Islam, that's all that matters. So he had his priorities straight, right? And he sent lots of scholars as missionaries to all of these far-flung lands to spread Islam. Now, this is why I've chosen him for productivity principles, because the amount of things he achieved in 2 years and 5 months, mind-blowing, right? Tax reforms, right? Just look at, I don't know who we had before, Theresa May and then Boris Johnson, and then look what Rishi Sunak's doing. How much can a leader, a political leader, actually do? How much change can they actually effect in society, right? In 4 years? Not much. Right? Maybe just a few reforms here and there, and then they like to trumpet that around as if they've changed the entire world. Right? But this man was in charge for 2.5 years. But he had something which we need, which we desperately need. He had something called barakah. He had something called divine blessings. His time was infused with barakah. What is barakah? Right? Blessings, the translation doesn't really help. It doesn't really help to convey a true sense of the concept. What is blessings? I'll explain it in one, I'll sum it up in one nice sentence, which is, you will achieve success in unimaginable amounts just because of barakah. Something small becomes enlarged to a degree you can't even comprehend. Right? Umar was in charge for 2.5 years because he had Allah on his side, and because he devoted his time to his religion. Allah then pretty much stopped the clock. Right? So it was as if the world was moving in slow motion for him, but for everybody else, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and it goes just like that. We are approaching the 25th night. Can you imagine? 25 days already gone. It just felt like yesterday when we were welcoming Ramadan, we were making all our preparations, and now it's pretty much coming to an end. It's coming to a close. That's because we lack barakah in our lives. So what's a quick antidote and remedy to reintroduce barakah into our lives? Very simple. Right? The more time you devote to the Quran, the more time Allah will devote to you. You will realize, and this is something experiential, right? You just have to experience it for you to understand what we mean. Just open up a Quran, read the Quran, set a time, 20 minutes, half an hour, set a target, maybe one segment, one chapter, 2 chapters, 10 pages, whatever it might be, but be punctual and be habitual with it. Then you realize Allah will bless every single second of your time. You had scholars in the recent past, more notably Sheikh Ashraf Ali Tanvi from the subcontinent. He lived only 100 years ago. He passed away in around 1948. He wrote in his short lifetime no less than 500 books. He authored 500 works, right? That's a mind-blowing amount. We're not talking about small booklets and small treatises. We're talking about booklets with hundreds of pages and voluminous books. Now, how could he have done that with the normal amount of life that we have? Right? We'll be lucky if we can at least finish one completion of the Quran in the month of Ramadan. Forget, write books and then also read the Quran and then also at the same time worship Allah and then tend to your family and then go to your place of employment. Imam Abu Hanifa, do you know how many Qurans he used to read in Ramadan? 2 full Qurans a day. He used to complete the Quran twice a day. Once during the day and once in his prayers at night. And it's not as if he thought, you know what? It's not as if he said to his family, don't call me. I'm going to do my own thing. It's not as if he said to his students, don't bother me. I want to focus on my worship. It's not as if he went cold turkey. I mean, he still attended to his classes. He still attended to his family. This is a man that we follow the Hanafi school of law. Right? So there are different estimates, but potentially one figure puts the amount of rulings that Imam Abu Hanifa devised for us at nearly 1 million. So nearly 1 million rulings on what to do when you're fasting, how to pay your zakah, how to perform your salah, what to do if you do something wrong. All rulings under the earth, under the sun, on the face of this earth, most of them were formalized and crystallized by Imam Abu Hanifa. But still, he found time to finish the Quran twice. Not in Ramadan, a day. That's 60 Quran in Ramadan. Now, how on earth did he accomplish that? I guarantee this, it is physically impossible for a human being, based on their own capabilities, to do that. He must have been assisted by Allah. That's the only rational explanation here, which is he was given some divine help and assistance. So if you want barakah in your time, then devote the best of your time to the Quran. There was one Arab scholar, he always used to say, the reason why we complain, I've not got enough time, time is of the essence, time is always against us, there's a reason for that. Because we give the Quran our fudulul awqat, not the afdalul awqat. We give the Quran our spare time. We have any surplus time, we've completed all of our tasks on our list of jobs, and we've got 5 minutes to spare. You know what? I might as well just read some Quran. Don't get me wrong, that's good, at least for dedicating time. But why don't we give the best of our time to the Quran? Why don't we make a structure, a timetable, and we say, you know what? I'm going to give 30 minutes, whether I've done my jobs or not, whether I feel like doing it or not. These 30 minutes have to be devoted to me and my Quran, me having a conversation with my Lord. That's what the Quran is. You open up a book. It's not a storybook. It's not a fictional book. It's not a textbook. It's a conversation you're having. That's a letter Allah's written to you. That's a personal address Allah's giving to you. Allah wants to tell you something. Allah wants to inform you of something personal and intimate, close to your heart. Right? So, I've got a few minutes. We'll finish off with this. So, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, with his life filled with barakah, filled with blessings, he carries on. Right? But he made quite a controversial policy change. One of his controversial policy changes was he halted expansion. Muslims, up until then, they were always on the move. They were always expanding the borders. They were always extending Muslim territory. Right? But he put a stop to that. And people were gobsmacked. How can you put an end to offensive warfare? Right? How can we not keep our troops busy? We need to constantly be extending our territory. But Umar had something else in mind. He had a higher purpose in mind, which was, look, the empire is expanding too quickly. And the new territories being brought into the Muslim lands aren't being given the care and attention and TLC they require. It's not about numbers. It's not about having numerical superiority. It's not about, oh, we're bringing in so many Muslims to the fold of Islam. Or, to give a more contextual example, today we took out 10 people for Jamaat. Or last weekend we took out 15 people. I was in a mosque in Blackburn. I'm not going to say the name. Quite a well-established mosque. Sort of like an unofficial Tablighi hub. And we sat together for the after Fajr consultation, the mashwara. And then you had about 5 different guys. So one person was saying, you know what, last weekend in my Jamaat group, I took out 10 people. Somebody else said, no, you know what, that's good. But my Jamaat, we took out 20 people. You know what, my Jamaat, we went out for 10 days. You know, my Jamaat, no, we went out for 40 days. Right? So they were trying to compete with one another. Then I thought to myself, in the Quran, Allah actually criticizes the companions. Right? Allah loves the companions, and Allah always lauds and praises the companions. But for Allah to rebuke and to tell the companions off means they did something wrong, which Allah didn't like. When they were going for the Battle of Hunayn, the companions said, we've got so many soldiers. Look at our numbers. There's no chance we can face defeat. In that very moment, their conscience shifted away from Allah's help to materialistic needs. Right? They thought, we're going to win today because we have numerical superiority, not because of Allah's help. Right? The Muslims at the Battle of Badr, 313 against 1,000. The odds were stacked against them. The ratio was 3-1. Right? They were inferior then, numerically, but did they lose? Or did they win? They won because they had Allah on his side. Right? So it's not about numbers. Umar understood that. He said, look, we want quality over quantity. We want people who can make their way to paradise without stumbling and staggering from side to side. We want people who can live up to the name of being a complete Muslim, not just nominal Muslims, not just Muslims by name. Right? And ask the Tablighi brothers, they'll tell you. It's sad. You knock on somebody's door and the name says Muhammad on the list, and you're not, oh sorry. Somebody answers the door, they don't even look Muslim. His brother Muhammad here. And he'll say, yeah, I'm Muhammad, but I don't really class myself as a Muslim anymore. I'm just Muhammad by name. But, oh, yeah, you know what? My dad was a Muslim, and my grandfather helped set up the mosque. My dad used to teach in the mosque. But you know what? Islam is just not for me. It's all about quality rather than quantity. Right? So he wanted to develop these local areas more. Right? He wanted to divert his attention to these local areas. Best example, right, I'll finish on this point. The best example of that is actually Muslim Spain. Muslim Spain was conquered under his predecessor, Al-Walid. But the thing is, it was so far away from Damascus. So how are you going to focus your attention on Spain? So Spain they conquered it. The lands of Spain sort of fell into disrepair. There were lots of Arab tribes there from Yemen, and they were always fighting with one another. There was a civil war. The locals were left to their own devices. They didn't have a good structure of governance, and it was a mess. When Umar came along, he said, look, we have a duty to these Muslims, so we're going to build up. We want to upscale these local areas. Right, so he then, with his governors, he set out on a really ambitious, huge project. He told his governors, I want you to carry out a full census, right? Take an account of all the Muslims and all the non-Muslims living in Muslim Spain and all of the villages. I want you to curate and create records of towns and cities and everyone and anyone, so that I can focus my efforts on developing each and every single one of their own personal skill set. Right? And because of what he did, so many centuries down the line, Muslim Spain grew and blossomed into one of the two centers of the world, right? During the medieval ages, when the Europeans was stooped in darkness and superstition, right? The Muslim world was thriving and blossoming. There were two centers. Today, if you want to send somebody for educational studies, where do you send them? Send them to either Oxford or Cambridge, to England, or to America, or to the West. Back then, non-Muslim or Muslim, if you wanted your child to have the best education, there were only two places you could send them to. Either Baghdad in Iraq or Cordoba, in Spain. Both under Muslim control. Because of what? Because of everything Umar ibn Abdul Aziz did early on. Right? So tomorrow, inshallah, tomorrow you have the Q&A. On Monday, inshallah, we'll conclude with his life, and then we'll move into a very, very important point to set the scene, which is parenting skills. Right? A very important proactive parenting practice which comes from Umar's mother. Right? And I'll let you jog your memory over the next couple of days to think about what his mother did. His mother made three very important decisions when Umar was young, right? Which shaped the course of his life and ended up shaping the course of history. The fact that his mother did something amazing, what attests to that fact? Well, the fact that we're sat here, so many thousands of miles away from Medina or from Damascus, where he lived, 1,400 years down the line, and we're still talking about him. We're still commemorating him. So remember, as a parent, you have an opportunity to create a legacy, a long-lasting legacy for your children, right? And if you think, you know what, I'm not a parent, I'm not even married yet, so I can miss Monday's session. Well, you want to build up these skills before you enter into the arena. Right? Everybody wants to prepare themselves before they take a leap of faith. Becoming a parent is the biggest leap of faith you can ever take in your life. You have to prepare yourself, not just financially, but spiritually and physically and psychologically. Right? And I'll end on this. My teacher always says, Mufti Abdul Rahman, he always says, it baffles him how you need to have a license to drive a car. Right? You need practical lessons, theory lessons. If you don't meet the pass mark, you're not given a license, because driving a car is a huge responsibility, right? You have the power of injuring somebody or even causing catastrophe on the roads. So you need a license. When it comes to bringing a child into this world and rearing a child, you have somebody's life in your hands, then we think you don't need any qualifications. We think you don't need any education. You can just be thrown into the deep end and these skills come naturally. These skills have to be learned. Right? And if you don't pick it up from your parents, you have to read or approach a scholar. Right? Even sit in courses and classes. So parenting is relevant for everyone, young and old, whether you're a veteran parent, whether you're not even married yet. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, finishing off here, we ask Allah to create a special place in our hearts for Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and He allows us to be productive with the limited amount of time we have in this world. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.